Hi, I'm Rachel Salzberg, a mindset and leadership coach and founder of the movement and podcast series, The Resal Revolution. I believe that every person has the potential to create a story of transformation about their life that's so great it serves as an inspiration and model to our families, our communities, and our organizations. This podcast series serves as a platform for people to have a voice, and it serves as an inspiration for you to write your story. It's my mission through this podcast series to help people to realize their potential by resouling and connecting with themselves, and then resurging with confidence and empowered to share their gifts and purpose with the world. Please join the movement by listening to the Resal Revolution. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining another real impactful conversation with the Resal Revolution podcast series. And today I'm honored to have a conversation with Charles Morris, who is one of the most inspirational leaders that I know. And we have been on similar paths and journeys in our life in terms of really being curious about mindset and how we shift our mindset, and also about mindfulness. And we connected, a few years ago when we realized that we actually worked with a coach, the same coach a few years back, Sonia Stoklosa, who's been wonderful in our lives. And she sparked our journeys and helped us to kind of find that passion and purpose and how to apply it to work and life. And I think, Charles, our mission is to bring consciousness into business and humanity back into the world. And so Charles is a learning and development leader, and he's a pioneer at Microsoft in developing a mindfulness program. Your background is in engineering and you're kind of now transferred back into HR learning and development. So Charles, I would love you to be able to kind of introduce yourself and your background.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks so much for having me. I think you've done a pretty good job kind of covering the details. The LinkedIn side of me, as I like to say. I think the only thing I would add is just kind of my own personal fascination with, as you say, consciousness, inner life. I think we have a lot of different phrases to talk about this, and really how that is grounded, I think, as it is for many of us, in life experiences and things that have happened where, either, some kind of crisis, or being in that position where there's almost nothing to do other than ask those really hard questions about life that often we're not necessarily coached to do in our normal education or by our parents and so forth. And so we really kind of have to make our own way. And that's kind of, I think, been the other piece that's behind a lot of what you see kind of coming out on the surface in terms of job titles or programs and things like that. But I know you share the same in terms of that, because it's very personal work. And we wouldn't have it any other way, I think.
Right. And I really believe, and I really appreciate what you said in terms of we all are trying to figure it out and find our way. Yeah. So it's and how we develop resilience through those events. Can you share in terms of in your life, what events or situations that got you really curious and how you figured out your way and propelled you to do what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those, there's several milestones along the way. The one I was just referring to that initially got me curious in the space of mindfulness was just a series of circumstances back in 2004. One of them was work related, where I had just transitioned out of the consulting arm of Microsoft and into the engineering groups, which at the time I thought was like a dream to like kind of get into the mothership and build the products that everyone uses. And then I started, and I was hit with this huge case of imposter syndrome. And it's actually interesting that we even have this phrase, and I tell the story relatively frequently, and everyone kind of nods when I just say imposter syndrome. So I don't have to say a lot more to explain what it is, but it was to the point for me where I was seriously contemplating quitting.
Wow.
Not just because it was like, I'm not good enough. I think there's definitely that side of the imposter syndrome. But for me, it was also my personality is not cut out for Microsoft. So there was almost this kind of like, oh, it's okay. Like, these types of people, the people who work here are this kind of person, and I'm this other kind of person. I'm too nice, or whatever the story might be. And anyways, luckily, before I kind of leapt out of the company and tried to do something else, because as we all know, the stories that we carry within us will follow us if we don't address them. Like that would have just a year or 2 or 6 months later, it would have just repeated. I started to ask more questions about, with the help of mindfulness, around what part I was playing in my own experience. What are these stories and so forth? And how could changing my mindset through some of these practices change, my experience, my reality, really. But yeah, that was not the only aspect that was happening at that time. I know we don't draw the line at work when in our conversations, and so I don't think we will here either. But there was also a personal situation happening where a very important relationship to me basically ended in a way that was just really confusing. Basically, I thought things were going great. This could be the person I was going to marry, et cetera. And then all of a sudden it just kind of dropped off a cliff, and all of these really kind of hurtful and really confusing at the time things were said that really kind of threw me for a loop, and it kind of ended shortly after that, but in a way that didn't leave me much closure. And so I really needed to be able to square this experience of, of course, my well-intentioned friends and so forth wanted to encourage me by just saying, oh, she's just insert label here. But that wasn't good enough for me. I needed to understand how someone who I knew was fundamentally a good, kind, and loving person could suddenly, change like this and behave in such a hurtful way. And so that was, it was all kind of in the mix at the same time.
I appreciate you saying this idea of imposter syndrome. As you said, everybody kind of nods. We all experience it. But as you acknowledged, it's really about the stories we tell ourselves, these limiting beliefs that we discover about ourselves. And even the most successful people, or what we perceive to be the most successful people in the world, all at some point and still have those challenges. And again, it's the thought pattern, it's the story. When you have a situation in relationship that kind of causes this questioning and self-doubt about yourself, I thought this thing about this person and it's completely different. And how did you manage not to, or did you kind of manage through that with taking it personally, how it might have fed into, quote, this imposter syndrome, whether I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, what's wrong with me, et cetera. And the two happening kind of in parallel, I imagine, was pretty powerful. And so, talk about crisis and resilience. So what were the things that you did to acknowledge those limiting beliefs, and how did you manage through it and grow from and learn from?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you kind of alluded to there, they seemed like different realms in some ways, and like, okay, just compartmentalize, but really when you dig just a little bit deeper into both of them, they were both very closely related to self-esteem, or, I'd go a level deeper and say down to my sense of identity, who I am, which is of course closely associated with concepts like self-worth. So yeah, in terms of addressing it, I mean, I think, I wish I could just say like I did X, Y, Z and everything was better. It was a years long process, but for me, a few things that I would point out. The first one is really just coming to believe and feel strongly about who I was, how I was showing up, and knowing that at the end of the day is all we can control. And it doesn't mean that, okay, and therefore I don't care about anything else, but there's, the flip side of this is acknowledging how much is out of our control and still being able to be okay with that is the nature of human life. And so, as an example from the work sphere, instead of just noticing my thoughts, as this is such a fundamental piece of mindfulness, noticing the stories. And so, and being able to redirect them. So instead of thinking about like, well, what is this? What do I need to do to seem smart enough for this person? It's more like, what if I put my awareness towards my intention, being of service, being focused, showing up authentically. And so I can say, what, actually, I don't know. Would you mind explaining this to me? Or, what have you? And so it's just really, it seems quite simple now that I'm just describing it. But again, this was a years long practice because those habits can be so deeply ingrained. And then the other piece I'll throw out really quickly that was really instrumental for me was to understand the power of our minds, really. And again, mindfulness was really crucial to this, but in particular, in our emotional life, and understanding that our mind can have kind of this distorting effect in the way that, in psychological terms, we talk about things like projection, and this can be either a positive projection, like this is kind of the opposite experience of falling in love, where this person is like, just seems like they're glowing, they couldn't possibly be more perfect. And then of course it can work in the other direction, where someone just seems like the most horrible, there's not a single positive redeeming quality about this person. And so to be able to understand that, with our unconscious, the way it works is it basically can distort our reality in ways that, make us feel in these potentially extreme ways. And so that helped me to see, untangle some of what happened, and to see, okay, it's not that this person is a bad person. It's just, they were under the influence, so to speak. I mean, it's actually a good phrase, because it's similar to how we know our senses are changed when we are drinking or whatever. And to understand, that's just part of how our minds work. And, again, it made me more self-inquisitive in terms of, okay, well, so if this is true of other people, like, where am I projecting things, and how is that affecting how I'm living my life?
I really appreciate you saying that, because it helps us to not take things personally. I really appreciate that term, but we all have our own filter, and we can get triggered, and our minds do things where we project and create a reality that may not be the actual reality. And I always use this term. It's the same Grand Canyon, but it looks very different from the top than it does from the bottom. And so when we can kind of take, as you said, 10 steps back and be more of an observer, and be more inquisitive about, okay, well, what are my thoughts? And how can I shift my thoughts to be able to interpret and filter differently? And then and then we gain empathy and compassion for another person, to whether they're under the influence of their own thoughts. And then we can start to really get curious and listen, as you said, and kind of get inquisitive about not only about ourselves and our thoughts and our feelings, and where they serve us or don't serve us. And then earlier on in the conversations, like the biggest aha, I think what something that I learned a long time ago, and that you're describing, is that we have so much more control than we realized over our thoughts and emotions. And rather than letting it run us, we can manage how we respond and interpret situations. We can't necessarily control what's happening to us or around us, but we can respond and control. And then we get into this freedom and empowerment to be able to kind of move forward in our life. And so what I appreciate you doing is using these two experiences and then applying it to this mindfulness and a discipline. We reprogram our brain, as you said, and yes, you spent a year, but you do this every single day. Can you help me understand how you then communicate and teach mindfulness at Microsoft, and how you've created transformational programs? And help people showing up to be their best selves and being aware of their thoughts and emotions. How do you do that at Microsoft?
Yeah, great question. I think the first thing I would say is that it's quite context dependent. And so even as kind of, this reputation I've now taken on at the company, I try to be very aware that mindfulness is not the thing for everyone. And so, for example, the way I might approach a brown bag where someone has asked me to come present to their team versus the Mindful Growth Program, which is the name of the program that I started there, and is filled with people who have opted in to this relatively big commitment, for a training program, uh, is quite different because okay, you've seen what we're going to cover, you've seen the time investment. I try to put up front this encouragement to not only come to the sessions, but also to develop a practice if they don't already have one, as kind of homework. Okay, you've seen like the everything you have to do, and you've said yes anyway. So I'm then able to I guess use the language of mindfulness in kind of a freer way. But that's not to say that I don't think we can't, strive for these broader applications as well. But as you very well know, um, we then it's upon us, I think, as practitioners to convey the value and the concepts in a way that just resonates with normal people. They're not necessarily going to go on a 10-day retreat or what have you, read all these books like we might. But again, I'm a big believer that even if you never want to say the word mindfulness, you can benefit from just some basic concepts and figuring out how it's going to work for you. And that's another thing that I really try to emphasize whenever I talk about it in this kind of setting, is that really personal. This is not, I think mindfulness can get this reputation that it's like, oh, in order to do mindfulness, it's like this path that's like, dug into the concrete, and you just got to get on board and follow the same thing that everyone else is doing. You watch your breath and you buy a Zabuton and, I don't know, all this, start lighting candles. Absolutely you can go that way, but I tend to be a lot more flexible in terms of saying, no, like this is about you. Are you a runner, for example? Well, guess what? You can, what are you doing with your mind when you're running? Could you pay more attention to just tuning into the feeling of your feet on the pavement, or the nature going by? That's a practice, and wouldn't that make your run more enjoyable? So really, kind of zeroing it in again, not trying to overwhelm them with mindfulness concepts or formal practices, but trying to say like, okay, wherever you are in your life, there's something here, I believe, for you.
I really appreciate you saying it's, the word mindfulness. There's a lot of question. What does it actually mean? And it can be kind of, especially from an engineering standpoint, a bit taboo to say, oh, mindfulness. No, I'm an analytical, a decision maker, or, I don't do mindfulness. And what I love, in our work is being able to communicate what mindfulness is in terms that people can appreciate and embrace and realize, as you said, you're doing it every day. Mindfulness is about being present in the moment, and it can be applied to anything. So describe mindfulness and how it then impacts in a positive way.
Yeah, I tend to go towards this really simple definition of paying attention to your attention. Basically, this idea that whether we realize it or not, we're always paying attention to something. And more, I think in this modern society we live in, it's kind of getting yanked all over the place, right? We're not necessarily paying attention, right? Next thing we know, we're kind of scrolling through our favorite social media feed. And, sometimes I have that moment of like, wait, what happened? How did I get here kind of thing? And so what I like about that definition is it's just so broad. Again, there's nothing about sitting with your eyes closed, paying attention to your breath, etc. I'm just like, hey, where is my mental energy going? And I've recently started talking more and more about this concept of the attention economy, because I think it's interesting that at a time when mindfulness is becoming more and more important, on the other side of things, or maybe on the same side of things, actually, businesses are talking about, it used to be, oh, we're competing for everyone's dollars, right? That was kind of the currency of the economy. And now, of course, especially in online and digital spaces, they're talking about the attention economy. In other words, the currency, like what you have individually of value, I would say even more than what's in your bank account or in your pocket, is your mental energy. Mm-hmm. And so what do we do with things that are really valuable to us? Right? It's like it doesn't make sense, right? If we treated, I'll use an extreme example. If we paid no attention to where our mind is going, just letting it go, it's kind of like leaving your wallet, just like taking your cash and just kind of like, of course we would never do that. And so I try to help people kind of see that, like, wow, I've got this thing of value within me that is always kind of being spent. So then from there, I think, to the second part of your question around how this becomes relevant at work. Wow. I mean, I could go on and on. I'll try to maybe just zero in on a few circumstances. The first and most obvious one that I'd have to start with is just self-care and stress management, avoiding burnout. I don't even know that I need to say a lot more about this. It's so prevalent today. And of course, there's a lot we need to do kind of out there in terms of managing our conditions, setting boundaries and so forth. And there's a lot we can do in terms of managing our awareness, because stress, as I like to remind people, it's not out there, right? We say stressful situations as if, okay, I'm going to be on a podcast today, let's say, check stressful situation, or not check, like, what is that something that the whole world's going to agree on? Of course not. It's very personal. Even one day to the next, it might be a stressful situation for me, and the next day not. So what's the difference? Of course, it's our awareness. What's the state of our mind? So that's one. The second one I would say is around, I'm going to lump two together so that I can keep the three. So number two for me will be a combination of focus and creativity. Mm-hmm. So I think focus tends to be more talked about in the mindful, or more well known, I would say, in the mindful space. Like, yes, it very much advocates, learning how to manage your distractions, learning how to be more single pointed, do what some people call deep work. Cal Newport wrote a book about this. The flow state is another kind of common concept out there. Like, we all know that to get into that mode where you're really feeling like you are doing your best work, it takes some space. You can't just squeeze it into 15 minutes between meetings. But again, it's the outer conditions and the inner conditions. I added creativity in there because I think more and more we are losing appreciation for the truly creative side of ourselves, of humanity. And some of the signs that make me say this are this kind of overvaluing of the rational, and this idea that problem solving is this kind of linear process where if the problem is this big and I'm this intelligent, then I need this much time to solve it, kind of thing, which I think, that kind of thinking gets ingrained in us, as opposed to how the brain really works, how we work as creative individuals, where our rational capabilities are just one part of how we process things. And in fact, the most, even in the scientific world, people like Einstein and others acknowledge that the most amazing breakthroughs, those kind of eureka moments, they don't come from just turning the crank. They came almost magically. Now we know, of course, through the right brain, through the unconscious, whatever terminology you want to use. But the key point, and where this relates to mindfulness, is actually the ability to get out of that hamster wheel. That's right. What sometimes my logical brain feels like. It's like it just wants to keep running. It's like, if I just keep running faster, then eventually everything will be solved. And so to be able to say, like, okay, I value you, you're a very important part of me, but you're not everything. And to actually create the space to allow other parts of us to know, basically. So that's two. And then the third one I'll throw in really quickly is in the interpersonal aspect of working. So I don't think, even if you own your own business, you are going to be working with customers, but of course, in any kind of significantly sized company, you really get nothing done on your own. It's all a matter of teams. And so just, breaking out of that mindset that mindfulness is just for me, it's for us as well. I can learn to be more present with other people, hear what they're really saying, pick up on what they're communicating between the words or underneath the words. Again, know what to say that will actually reach out and will actually connect with them, as opposed to just kind of trying to, bash them over head with my superior logic or what have you. So that's, I think, the third aspect. But again, I could probably go on and on.
It's so fascinating how I really appreciate those three pillars that you described. And when we think of mindfulness, it's being mindful of how we're moving through this life, how we're thinking, how we create space, how we manage our energy, how we engage with others. What I really appreciate you talking about is mindfulness is about focus and attention, and where you choose to focus to get into that flow state. And focus doesn't mean just kind of honing in on something for so long. It's actually stepping away from the problem and focusing attention to something maybe entirely different, whether it be nature or whatever, so that those insights, that creativity come. But it's really the stepping away from the problem to get that creativity. And so bringing that ourselves to work in this mindful place it impacts relationships positively. And then kind of the beginning of your kind of description of that energy, right? It's a currency. It preserves your energy by creating mindful space, by, especially now slowing down and setting boundaries in the midst of this kind of the currency between this psychological fatigue from the, COVID, to how we can slow ourselves down to be more creative, to create better relationships, to preserve and renew our energy, and be able to kind of be much more impactful in that work. And it's kind of this counterintuitive. So I appreciate your description around what is mindfulness. It's not sitting necessarily and meditating, but in one sense, but it's also creating a discipline. So how would you kind of describe your discipline and being able to share that out with others? Because I think part of the Resoul Revolution kind of podcast series is helping people to, share their stories of resilience, but also share best practices and tools from their own experiences to be able to share out. So what are some things that you do each day as your discipline for mindfulness?
Yeah, wow. It really changes for me. And I think that's one thing I've learned to do over the years, is to allow my practice to ebb and flow in one way, but also kind of just transmute and transform. Because when you've been at it as long as we have, I think one of the dangers that can creep in is kind of this feeling of being rote, or it loses its kind of vitality. And so actually part of my practice has been recently not forcing myself to sit, actually, and just trying to be more mindful in other things I do, or just see what is coming, like what has energy right now. And honestly, at this point, it changes from day to day, but I can give you a few examples of things that have just kind of caught my attention recently. So one is eating, actually, and this is kind of, for me, has been a with COVID and everything, it was kind of one of those like, well, enough of the fun things we do in life have been snatched away, so I can relax a little bit on the diet, and you know what happens after that. And so it's just been a little bit of like, okay, that was what it needed to be. I feel like I've made that choice as conscious as I could. And now, I think the springtime helps here in the Pacific Northwest. Like, okay, like, what does it mean to have a little bit more mindfulness and discipline around eating? And for me, that has meant, a lot of the things that we've already talked about, just simply slowing down and remembering like, oh, wait, if I actually just enjoy, it's like a win-win situation. If I just slow down, put my phone down, just enjoy my food, I actually get more joy out of it. I eat less because it's not this kind of, race against the clock or a race to get to the bottom of the bowl or whatever. And I'm more likely to make healthy choices, actually. And so that's just one of those kind of rediscoveries, I would say, where it's like, oh yeah, now I know why I talk about this to other people. It's because I need to do it myself. Another aspect that has been really important to me has been exploration of different types of meditative techniques. And so I know we've kind of stayed kind of in the mindfulness lane in our conversation, but maybe this is a chance to expand a little bit. But I'm currently studying, doing a degree in Jungian in-depth psychology based on the work mostly of Carl Jung. And he talked about a method called active imagination, which I don't know if you've spent any time exploring this, but if you look at it, it's like it's a meditative practice in many ways. But essentially what this does is very similar to a classic mindfulness meditation. You tune into, what you're feeling in that moment. Or sometimes you'll go in with a specific feeling that maybe has been recurring over days or showing up in your dreams and that kind of thing. But kind of the extra dimension that he added onto it was that I haven't seen in classic mindfulness is this idea of personifying what you're feeling, or that kind of recurring complex or pattern that you get into. And so it's a very imaginative exercise where you're basically having a conversation with a part of yourself. And I think it fits in so beautifully with mindfulness because you need to be able to go there and kind of let go of your conscious thoughts and not be questioning, like, am I going crazy for talking to myself? But actually just allow your imagination to take you. And to really show love to this part of you, like this kind of a formal part of the practice where key part to this being successful is there's not an inquisition. It's like, even if it's a part of you that, it's like, let's say it's your perfectionist side as an example. It's not like, why do you keep showing up and like making my life so difficult? It's more like, so tell me about, like, what is it that you really want? Like, what are you trying to do here? And so it opens up this kind of, beautiful dialogue, this very friendly dialogue, and this acknowledgement that we are all a multitude of ideas and we can say little selves. And so that's something that I've really enjoyed exploring. And I actually, just right after saying that I haven't seen as much of that in the mindfulness world, I remember that's not quite true. Of course, so many of these practices and traditions mixed together. There's a wonderful practice called feeding your demons that's taught by a wonderful teacher named Lama Tsultrim. that has a lot of these components of
Mm-hmm.
personification. And it's a very similar theme where, of course, in this case, it's a demon. So something that part of ourselves that we find kind of scary or something like that. But again, the feeding aspect of it is, again, a very similar theme of showing a friendly face and actually giving ourselves over to it and not being confrontational. So anyways, those are a couple of things that came to me in the moment in terms of things that are, as I continue to keep myself fresh and challenged in my own journey.
And I think that what you said at the very beginning of your answer there was being flexible and adaptable to kind of different ideas and or modalities, and pulling in where you can be flexible. As humans, we could be extreme and rigid in one area, but to pull in different modalities, I think is very important. Again, about being mindful about what it is that we need at a certain time. And something you also kind of expressed, and I think, we had a conversation not that long ago about this, is kind of your feelings, being aware, so mindful about your feelings. And so often we have this unconscious edge, right? Something, a pattern that's gnawing at us. And so whether it's our demons or whatever we want to call it, and we can be acknowledging of our negative feelings to understand and then be kind around it, and then use visualization. I went through a visualization the other day. I have these elephants in the background, elephants that I painted here a while back, but I looked at them where I wasn't feeling grounded and centered. And I wondered, and I had this visualization of me being an elephant, kind of stepping forward, moving forward in life, kind of less affected, grounded and centered. I think that what you're talking about is being able to acknowledge our negative feelings, giving ourselves grace, but then to visualize and be creative around how we want to be, to shift the mindset. This takes discipline and practice, and being aware of feelings and how feelings are generated by thoughts and emotions. I think that if we all kind of incorporate bits and pieces day to day, we become much more present and be able to kind of let go and surrender to that which does not serve us, and to be much more intentional. So,
Absolutely, yeah. The only other thing, that popped to mind as you were speaking was if we can, I think sometimes, even especially when something is beneficial to us, as of course I could go on about more formal mindfulness practices, and I've had yoga practices, qigong practices, and I feel like they're still with me. But sometimes I think we can, when we find something that's helpful, we can say, okay, this is my forever practice. This has been changed my life, and therefore I need to do it forever. Whereas what I've found is, again, and this can be, this can unfold over the course of years, of course, where again, it's up to us to know when, okay, it's, as I mentioned earlier, this is feeling a little stagnant. What do I need to do? And to be open to explore. It's not like, cheating on my main practice. It's like, well, what else, what am I being called to explore? And I'm sure it's nowhere near over for me, but where I am right now is, I feel like now I have this kind of smorgasbord of things at my fingertips that, sometimes, I do pull out. It's like, oh, I really just want to do some qigong right now, or, just getting out in nature. You mentioned that earlier. I've been blessed to move into an area where it's much more at hand, and so going on hikes or just going to sit at the beach and watch the water. Again, so these little mini or not so many practices just start to arise all over.
Right. And I think, I appreciate you saying, so this idea of stagnancy, it's like we can get stagnant in a practice where then when we start to feel that stagnancy, we can kind of just pick and choose from our toolbox or seek out a different, and none of this has to take time, a lot of time. It's just these bits
Mm-hmm.
and pieces, whether it's throughout the day, whether it's taking breaks, getting out into nature, just sitting and watching. And I think also being a model for that, when we give ourselves permission, we give others permission. Then that creates consciousness into business, consciousness in terms of our interactions and engagement, consciousness in our creativity. I really believe that, what you're describing is consciousness in business and bringing humanity, the human, back into the business and into the world. And that's making a world a better place. And, and that in itself is, developing this resilient mindset by learning and growing and shifting our paradigms as humans. Individually and then collectively. So I think you're an incredible model for and an honor to know you as a human and as a leader, and how you're then helping to facilitate the transformation within a company such as Microsoft. So it's really cool to see you manifest and communicate your journey and then apply it on a larger scale impact. And it's really amazing that you can be this model of transformation, which is really about resoul and resurge. You're talking exactly about the resoul revolution. So I really, really appreciate your being able to share who you are and your journey and your practices and your mission and vision in this life. And it's been an honor to chat with you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Yeah, it's an honor to know you as well. And this was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And it's been a really great conversation. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Please reach out to me if you have a story to share. We'd love to hear from you and how you created change in yourself and developed resilience, purpose, and confidence. You can inspire others to resoul, resurge, to shine, and thrive. You can reach out to me at rachel@facetscoaching.com or go to theresoulrevolution.com. You can also subscribe to The Resoul Revolution on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube to hear more interviews with real people and real stories of resurgence. By listening, you're contributing to the movement, The Resoul Revolution.